Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator of undergraduate research initiatives at the University of Saskatchewan. Thank you so much for joining us. As we gather here today, even in our virtual environment, I would like to acknowledge that I live on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I pay my respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors and contemporaries in this space and reaffirm our relationship with one another. Thank you so much for being with us today. And today we are recording it, and it is Canada's Indigenous Peoples Day. And I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge and give thanks for the great leadership that we continue to learn and enjoy and follow. And thank you so much for that today. Our session today is how to write a grad school application. Obviously, a well-attended session. We had a lot of students sign up for this one, a lot of students who are considering graduate school. And if this is you, then this session is for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, which is Cody Bugler. And Cody comes to us from Recruitment. Cody, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. As Mel mentioned, my name is Cody Bugler. I am a recruitment officer with the student recruitment team at the University of Saskatchewan. I am also an alumni of the university through the College of Arts and Science. And today, I'll be talking a bit about how to apply to grad school. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. Later on, my colleague Marc will also be sharing a few words as well, going into a bit more detail about a few items that I'll touch on. So I'm guessing that many of us here are either current USask students or are considering grad school at USask. So I'll just very briefly go over a bit about us, because I'm sure you're already very familiar with the university, but just some interesting information. There's just about 26,000 students, more than 3,300 self-declared Indigenous students, and then over probably closer to 3,500 international students from over 132 different countries. So very big university, growing every year, and we're just so happy to have the makeup of the campus that we currently enjoy. So a little bit about our research. We have over 118 research chairs and distinguished professors. There are 55 research centers on campus and 80 plus fields of graduate study. So it's a lot of opportunity, a lot of areas, a lot of different fields that you can consider. We are part of the U15 group, which is part of the top 15 research universities in Canada. And there's a bit more information that I thought I had on the slide here, but I'll go on. Oh, it's a little bit further on. So just a bit about the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. So when you become a graduate student, you are both a member of your program of choice, so that would be your department, and then you're also considered a student within the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. So when you apply to the university, or when you apply to a master's or a PhD, you're first connecting with the department of choice. So that would be, let's say I was interested in doing a master's of science in biology. So of course I'd be dealing with the Department of Biology on campus, which is technically housed within the College of Arts and Science. But as a student, I'd be a student within the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. And when you apply to become a graduate student, you're applying to the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. So that's just a bit about the lingo there. Signature areas of research. These are some areas that we are very proud of the work that we do in. So we have, of course, we're in Saskatchewan, so we have a lot of research within the field of agriculture. Another is One Health, so we're looking at the relationships between the health of the environment and how that relates to the health of humans. I think the best way to explain this in more understandable terms is, say, if we were talking about microplastics, for example. So if there are a lot of microplastics in the ocean and the fish that we eat, then we can definitely consider that we're going to be having a significant amount of microplastics within us as well. So just thinking about how the human-animal environment relationship contributes to the health of all three of those things. Water security, we are ranked very highly. I believe last year we were #1 in Canada in this area. We also have the Global Institute of Water Security on campus. Indigenous research, we have a number of distinguished Indigenous professors and faculty members on campus. Further, we have the area of energy and mineral resources, a very popular area within the College of Engineering. And then also we have the only synchrotron in, I'm not sure if it's Canada or if it's all of North America, but synchrotron science is another area of research that we are very actively engaged in. If you're not sure what a synchrotron is, I think this is my understanding. It's like they're accelerating particles at a really fast rate or something like that. I mean, they offer tours. I think they also offer some presentations. So if you want to learn more about what the synchrotron is, definitely consider looking at the Canadian Light Source and their programs. So I was talking about like the top 5, top 4 areas. This is the areas that we are the top 5 in. So as I mentioned, #1 in water resources, and then top 5 in these following areas. So these are based on 2020 rankings, but we look at agricultural science, water resources, biotechnology, environmental sciences and engineering, food science and technology, material science and engineering, public administration, and veterinary sciences. Yeah, we have a number of centers on campus, so I'm sure many of you have heard of or are familiar with the Vito Intervac Center. It's a place where they look at infectious diseases and also develop vaccine prototypes. We have developed a few of the COVID-19 vaccine prototypes on campus. None of them are currently in active use, but the research is done and they're doing some clinical trials at the Canadian Centre of Vaccinology in Halifax. So those are going on. Some work is being done there. I'm not sure what all of my slides are here. Oh, there we go. As I mentioned, we have the Global Institute for Water Security as well. We also have an Institute for Food Security. Food security is an emerging issue that continues to go on throughout the world, as I'm sure many of you are aware. One of the professors that I had heard a lecture from, her name's Dr. Priscilla Setti. She actually theorizes that there is enough food in the world, but the problem is the distribution. So she'd be very interested in this work, and I'm sure she's done some work with this Global Institute. I talked a bit about the Canadian Light Source. I did my best to describe what it actually is and what they do. Anyway, so like it kind of does some stuff with like cancer research and yeah, like really like small molecular stuff. I wish I could describe that a bit better. We also have some, if you're not quite wanting to do a full-on master's or PhD, we do have some graduate certificates. These are just a few of them. So there's everything from public management, public policy, economic analysis for public policy. There is some teaching certificates as well. Yeah, and these are considered at a graduate level, so it's not quite considered the same as like a, say if you did a 1 or 2 year diploma at graduate level. So these are considered a bit more complex. While we do have like thesis-based masters and PhDs, we also do have some professional graduate programs. So what a professional graduate program is, it's a program where it's more course-based and there isn't necessarily like a thesis or dissertation at the end of it. So these are a few of them there. Okay, and now I'll talk about the steps to applying. So I think this would actually be easier if I just showed you the website in itself. These are just kind of the overall steps. So #1 is, of course, finding a program. So as I mentioned, there are over 80 areas of study within the graduate level at our university. #2 is learning the requirements and deadlines. And then there are some many steps in between here before you go on to apply, but I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. Checking your application status, ensuring that your documents are submitted. If you receive an offer, then you will accept your offer of admission, and then you would be considered a graduate student. So just kind of the 6 steps. But what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to, instead of continuing with my slides, it's a bit easier if I just go through and show you on the website itself. So let's see if I can figure this out again. Here we go. Okay, so you're kind of one-stop shop for all of the information related to how to become a graduate student at our university, what programs we offer, what the requirements are, information about scholarships and all that sort of thing is housed on grad.usask.ca. So grad.usask.ca is a very excellent resource. I use this website almost daily just with my work, and then it's also just very useful for prospective graduate students as well, of course, because that's who it was made for. So the main thing that I like to show students when I am talking about graduate programs, or if they're inquiring about graduate programs, is this website. So on here, you will find our full list of graduate programs at the master's and PhD level, and then as well as our graduate certificates. So you'll see that we have a great number of areas. The list goes A to Z. And then also you'll see if we offer either a master's or a PhD or both in those areas, and it's signified with a check mark on the side there. Each individual program has an individual program page. With that, you'll find all of the information relevant to that program, how to apply to that program, what steps you need to take, as well as what the deadlines are, what month they have intakes for students. So say, for example, some programs will take in students in September, January, and May, or some might only have a September intake. So that information will be found there as well. So let's say I was interested in, I'll just use biology again. So let's say I wanted to do a master's or a PhD in biology. So let's go take a look there. So for this program, we can see that there's both a master's and a PhD. We can see that applications are accepted throughout the year, but then scholarship competitions are held in April of each year. So if you're wanting to be considered for scholarships, you'll want to apply early on of the year that they're doing the scholarship competitions, or even as early as September of that year. So it talks a bit about what the program is, how it's structured, and then also one of the main points that I like to point out to students is this specific line of text right here. So on each individual page, for each program, you'll see the list of research supervisors that are within that department. So you'll see with this one that it says, we recommend that you contact the faculty that you're doing research in, or that you'd like to do research in before beginning a formal application. So this just encourages you to connect with a potential supervisor. It doesn't necessarily specify that they need to agree to supervise you at this point, but just connecting with them and basically building a relationship so that they potentially might recommend you for admission to the college and the department. Let's look at another example. Let's say chemistry this time. So for this one, again, contacting them, generally they'll let you know if they're interested in supervising, if they have the capacity. And then if they don't, you just might not hear back, or they will let you know that they don't. But you'll see each individual supervisor has some information about their research areas, what their areas of specialty are. You can also click, let's look at Amy Stevens, and we can get even more in-depth information about them. They sometimes also have a faculty website that has either a lot or not a lot of information. Okay, so those are just a couple of examples of programs where you do need to contact the supervisor beforehand and potentially even need to make sure that they're willing to supervise you. But then there also are some other programs where that isn't necessary. So an example of a program where you don't need to contact a supervisor beforehand would be computer science. So again, for this one, the deadline is, so if you want to start in September, apply by January 15th. They have both a master's and PhD. And as I mentioned, so for this one, the line here is different. So it'll say it's not necessary to find a potential supervisor before you apply to this program. So I do know a bit about this particular program. So for this one, they just basically collect all the applicants. They read all your info at a department meeting. And then if faculty have the capacity or are interested in you as a student, they'll indicate their interest and then basically recommend you for admission after you've applied. So the main piece with the supervisor part is some of them, for many programs, actually most programs, they'll want you to contact the supervisor beforehand and just ensure that they're able to supervise you. And then they'll invite you to apply, basically. For this program and some other programs, you don't need to contact them beforehand, and you can just go ahead and apply without being in communication with the faculty. With that, there's a third piece to it. So one of the unique areas is the College of Engineering's graduate programs. So if you're interested in doing an engineering degree at the master's or PhD level, there is an extra step. So for engineering graduate programs, you do need to fill out what's called the pre-qualification form. So that's just kind of how engineering structures their applications. So before applying or before starting the process of applying, you'll fill out this form, which is kind of similar to how computer science does it. But for this one, they don't want you to just apply beforehand. So I'll just show you what this form looks like. So for engineering, they'll ask for all of this information, just some basic info about you, what your credentials are, if you meet the English language proficiency requirements, if you've done any sort of publications or presenting at conferences, that sort of thing. You'll need to fill out this form. And that kind of just gives the College of Engineering an idea of your competitiveness as an applicant, and then they'll bring it to the staff, the faculty, and they'll indicate their interest in that way. So for engineering programs, that is how she goes. What else can I tell you about here? As I mentioned, so when you're applying or when you're contacting a supervisor, you'll want to include as much information as possible. So for the most part, what you'll do is you'll basically introduce yourself, include information about your estimated average, what your areas of research interest are, if you've had any publications, or if you've submitted any papers for publications, if you have attended any conferences, or if you've presented at conferences, just things that make you exciting as an applicant, so that'll draw the attention and interest of a supervisor. Okay, so I think I'm kind of reaching to the end of what I wanted to talk about. But I'm just trying to think if there's another piece that I should mention here. So with grad.usas.ca, there are some pages like that talk about our scholarships as well. So one of the more prestigious awards on campus is the Dean Scholarship, with varying values between masters and PhDs. If you want to be considered for the Dean Scholarship, you do need to be recommended by a professor. And you'll also need to kind of apply early before the competitions go. So the round 1 deadline is November 30th, and then the second round of competitions is February 1st. There are other opportunities that you can go through if you are interested in applying for scholarships. And then another area that you could consider applying for is funding from the Tri-Agency, Tri-Council scholarships. These are one of the more prestigious awards in Canada. So they're granted by Canada's major research granting agencies. So NSHRC, SHRC, and then CIHR. I'm never really sure how to pronounce them, but they kind of are split into different areas. So And CERC is Natural Sciences and the Engineering Research Council of Canada. And then SHRC is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research. And then CIHR, Health Research. So those ones you will also need to submit an application and be recommended by your supervisor. And these are considered some very prestigious awards in Canada. One of them that is very highly valued is called the Vanier Scholarship. And that one is for students who are doing PhDs, and they go all the way up to something like $50,000. So they're very prestigious and highly valued. Yeah, and I think that's kind of all I have to talk about. So with that, I'll hand it over to Marc, who will talk to you a bit more about how to contact supervisors, and then also just a bit more about graduate studies. So Marc, I'll pass it over to you now if you're ready.
Great, thanks, Cody. So Cody gave everyone kind of a good overview of navigating the page and what the institution does and kind of some of our areas of research focus. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of pulling together an application and what that looks like. So I'm going to try and share my correct screen if it lets me. Let's see.
It's looking good.
Can everyone see that? Are you seeing?
I sure can.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, I've just called it the do's and don'ts of applying to grad school because I thought that was kind of fun. So Cody talked a little bit about graduate certificates, course-based programs, thesis and project-based programs. Really, for our purposes here, I'm going to divide them into two categories because the process of applying differs slightly for both. So if you're applying to a graduate certificate or a course-based program, the application process is slightly different than if you're applying to a thesis or project-based program. So I will highlight some of those differences as I'm going through, but just so you know what I'm talking about, that's kind of the categorizations I've used.
Marc, do you want to
Yes.
put yours into, do you want to put it into presentation mode?
Oh, sure. Does that make it
There.
better? Do I need to switch my...
Yeah, just switch your display.
Is that better?
We can see your upcoming slide, which is just fine. So
Oh.
we can see your
Okay,
view.
let's go back. Is that better?
No, we seem to be stuck because when we see whatever screen you're sharing.
Right. Yeah, I always... let's see if we just duplicate it. Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
There we go. Okay.
Super awesome. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Merle. So as Cody mentioned, there are two kind of categories of research-based programs. There are those from an application perspective. There are those that you need to identify a supervisor before applying, and there are those that you can apply to a program without a supervisor pre-identified. So if you're looking at applying to a program where you need a supervisor before you apply, you're really, as current U of S students, you're really in an advantageous position because you can, I mean, in a typical year, you can actually stop by someone's office, but because that's not really possible these days, it's still easier for you to reach out by email or to set up kind of a virtual meeting. And in that meeting, you're just going to, you tell them that you're interested in thinking about grad studies in whatever area. So Merle and I are historians. So say I'm interested in 18th century British history. So you'd reach out to someone working in that area, you tell them you're interested, you ask them if they're planning to take on students next year. Do they have funding to offer? What kind of research projects are they interested and able to supervise? That kind of stuff. It's a good way to put out feelers and just to see who has capacity and who you might be interested in working with once you get a chance to know them a bit better. The best time for you to usually do that is usually at some point over the summer or before in the fall of your final year of your undergrad program. That depends a lot on the application deadline for the department, but that's usually a good kind of general period of time to make those types of inquiries. So if you're interested in applying to a program where you don't need a supervisor, so let's say you're looking at a research-based program in education, even if you're not required to identify a supervisor before you submit your application, it's still not a bad idea to, again, reach out to a couple faculty members, tell them that you're interested in applying to a grad program, tell them that what your kind of research area of interest is. I'll use myself as an example here. So when I was applying to my PhD, I reached out to a couple of potential supervisors, both as a way of letting them know that I was interested in doing further grad work, but also as a way of kind of interviewing them, because it's a relationship that you build with your supervisor. And particularly for a PhD, it's a longer relationship. So you really want to have a good idea of who you can work with. And it also helps at the end in those types of programs where, as Cody mentioned, so at one point in the year, the unit will get together and they'll kind of throw all the applications down for students who have applied to grad programs in their department, and they'll start picking through them. If you've reached out to someone and said, you know, you're interested, this is the area you're interested in working in, they're going to remember that, and the chances of them picking you out of that pile, and even if they don't become your supervisor, but someone else in the department becomes your supervisor, your chances are much better if you've reached out to them beforehand. Okay, so then let's talk about the online submission. So there is the online application form. Usually takes about 30 minutes to complete, pretty straightforward. A lot of standard kind of personal information. So your name, address, all of that fun stuff. The contact information for 3 referees. So for any graduate program you apply to on campus, you're required to include contact information for 3 references for you. Usually we like at least 2 of those references to be academic. One of them can be professional. That really depends on the program you're applying to, though. And so these people will speak to your ability to either conduct research or engage in coursework at an advanced level. So they should have some experience with you and some kind of background knowledge of you and your interest in the graduate program. I'll touch a little bit more on reference letters and reaching out to references later on, but just to let you know that it's at this stage of the application where you actually have to confirm who your references are. And then you're also going to, at this point, you're going to include your statement or a letter of intent. They vary by program. So again, a statement or a letter of intent for a thesis-based program will be different than a statement or a letter of intent for a course-based program. If you're applying to a course-based program, what it's going to look like, so in a thesis-based program, you would focus mostly on your research experience, the area of research that you're interested in pursuing for your master's degree. Again, keep in mind that I would say in probably about 97% of cases, your actual course of research will differ from what you submitted in your statement. That's totally fine. Everyone expects that. What they're using the statement, though, for is to get a sense of your kind of broader awareness of the discipline, get a sense of how you write, how you communicate, maybe how you use APA, can you reference properly? They're really using it to evaluate your potential to conduct research in that area. They're not as concerned with the specifics of what you're proposing. So that's for a research-based program. For a course-based program, it's slightly different in that in your statement of intent, you're going to focus more on your either employment or study-related experiences as they relate to your interest in that particular program. So why do you want to pursue, let's say, a master's of public health? How does that fit into your kind of longer-term career or educational goals? And how do you plan to use that? And what's your end game, really? So it's speaking, again, demonstrating to the department that you can communicate effectively, that you've done a little bit of research into the program that they're offering, and that you know a little bit, that you haven't just kind of gone on, applied, and thrown your name in the hat, so to speak. It's important to make sure that, I'll talk about this a bit later again, but it's important to make sure that your statement or letter of intent actually speaks to the specifics of the program you're applying to. Some students will make the mistake of creating kind of a generic statement or letter of intent that they may submit to multiple programs at multiple institutions. I would strongly discouraging you from going that route because it's usually pretty evident when people on the other side get those. It shows that A, you haven't taken time to look at the details of the program that they offer, that you're kind of a little bit wishy-washy as to where you want to go. So you want to make sure that each statement or letter of intent that you draft is specific to a particular program, a particular course of research, and a particular institution. Some other requirements of submission, sometimes they ask for a writing sample. So if you're an undergraduate student applying to a master's program, usually what I would recommend students to do is if they've done an honors paper and they did particularly well in that, include that. Or it really can be any loosely related research paper that a student has written that you did well on. One thing to be careful about here is make sure that you're actually submitting what they're looking for. So if they are looking for a writing sample that's 20 pages long, don't submit a 25-page paper that you wrote for another class without tweaking it until it's at 25 pages. Again, doesn't give a good impression, and you want to give the best impression as part of your application. You'll also be required to submit a CV for almost all programs. A CV is different from a resume, simply in format and kind of the areas you focus on. So again, in a typical CV, you've got your name and your contact details, your education, any awards that you've won related to your education, any related employment, and any other kind of background experience that's relevant to what you're applying for here. Again, important to customize them for each of the programs that you're applying to. So some specialized requirements to be aware of. Number one, I called it residency requirements, probably not the best title because that can mean a couple of things, but in this sense, it means just be aware some specialized programs. I'm going to pick on the Masters of Physical Therapy program right now, both because my wife teaches in it and her office is next door to mine at home, and I like to pick on the program, but also because it's a good example of this. So it has a residency requirement. So that means you have to have been a resident in Saskatchewan for at least 2 years before you can be considered for the program. And there are a couple of other programs, mostly in the health sciences, that have residency requirements. Some programs, again, mostly in the health sciences, are using these Casper personal statements. It's an online form that you fill out, you ask some questions, and it provides them with a little bit more insight into your personality outside of academia, but important to be aware of here because you probably want to do those types of things before you actually start your official application, just so you have that done when you go to apply. Again, some programs will have specific prerequisite courses or requirements that you have to take before you apply. So if we go, most graduate programs, the requirement is that you have a 4-year honors degree or equivalent with a minimum GPA of about a 70, right? But some programs will say, as part of that 4-year undergraduate degree, you have to make sure you took these 4 courses. And if you haven't, you should probably have a plan to take them before you begin your program. Standardized tests. So in Canada, these aren't overly common outside of business or economics, but so if you're applying to the MBA program, for example, you're going to have to include a GMAT score as part of your application. The one thing I would kind of highlight in relation to standardized tests is take the test early. So if the application deadline is January 1st, you may want to do your first run at the test, maybe that previous summer or certainly early in the fall. That 2 benefits to that. You have your scores early, so you can include them in your application, which always really speaks well to a student's preparation. If you submit an application and say, oh yeah, you're going to take the test 3 months from now, not ideal. But it also means that if you take the test and don't do as well as you were hoping to, you have some extra time to retake it again and get a better score, and that's what you can submit with your application. Some programs also do interviews. They take a variety of formats. I think this last year, working remotely, many faculty are now doing kind of informal interviews. So some interviews at the program level. So for example, the Masters of Science in Marketing, their admissions committee interviews all of their kind of top candidates just for them to get a better sense of the applicant. but also for them to share a little bit more in detail about the department and kind of what the program is like. Some other programs, it's really at the faculty supervisor level. So if a faculty member has, let's say, 4 spots in their research program for next year, they have 8 really good applicants for those spots. They will set up kind of brief Zoom interviews. It's nothing too long. It's usually about 15 minutes, just to kind of give them a better sense of your knowledge, your skill set, your personality. It's good for them, but it's also really good for you as the student, again, to get a better sense of that supervisor, because it's someone who you'd be working with quite closely and quite intensely for that period of your program. So it's good to know if you'll work alongside with them well, or if maybe they're not ideal for you. And that's totally okay. Not every person works well with every other person, but it's good to know that at the beginning. Okay, so some final thoughts. This is probably like the tips and tricks section. So I referenced this earlier, but I'm going to highlight it because I think it's really important. Make selection bias work for you. So we all know that if you're hiring people, if you're selecting people for a program, you're far more likely to choose someone who you're familiar with. So you, as current U of S students, really have an advantage here that you should use. Again, that's why even if it's not required to reach out to a faculty member and see if they're interested in supervising you before you apply, to do that. Again, I'll use my own situation here. When I applied for a PhD program, I was already working on campus, so I had a little bit of insight that way. But again, I kind of interviewed 3 potential supervisors, decided on one, told that individual that yes, I was interested in working with them. And she's okay. So when we meet as a department, what's going to happen is they're really going to like throw all the applications on the table, and I'm going to fight for you because I know that you want to work with me. We've talked about, your potential research program. I know you. That's how we're going to go. So make that bias work for you. Strong recommendations. So quite often in both my current life and my former life, I would be asked to be to write a letter of recommendation for someone applying to a grad school. What you want to be sure when you ask someone is, first off, ask them, will you write me a strong recommendation letter? Don't just ask them to write you a recommendation, but a strong one. Also, don't come to them last minute. If the application is due December 15th and you reach out to them on the 13th, that usually doesn't speak well to you, because putting together a good, thorough recommendation takes time, it takes some effort, and it's also really clear to the person on the other side on the admissions committee when maybe someone hasn't put in that much effort and hasn't maybe been given the time to go into those details, and it reflects really poorly on the applicant. So when you reach out to someone who you want to use as a referee, send them a draft of your statement of interest, send them a copy of your CV, highlight for them how they know you. So even if it's something as, you taught me in 3 of my 400 level biology classes, this is the area of work I want to pursue at this institution, this is why I think I'd be really good at it. That comes through very loudly when the faculty member or whoever it is submits the recommendation. So our recommendation forms at the U of S, the first part is a form where your referee is asked to kind of put you into specific quartiles as to like your ability to conduct advanced research, your ability to study at an advanced level. But there's also kind of an open text box section, or they can upload a letter of reference if they wish. And it's in those areas that if their student and the referee have worked together and the student gave them some notice and gave them some background, that it becomes really evident. And it's just another nice way of kind of highlighting your abilities as a student. I talked about number 3 already, take tests early. And number 4, again, just be specific. Make sure your statement of interest, research statement, is designed for a specific program and you don't just create a generic one. Faculty members quite often get spammed by potential students, and they see it quite often where a student will just write a generic statement of intent, send it off to 50 different faculty members, sometimes all in the same email, and that doesn't bode well. So be specific, show the faculty supervisor and the department that you've taken some time to look at their websites, maybe reference a couple of publications that have come out of that department that you're interested in the area that you're interested in working with. It will really kind of help you as you go through the process and as your application is reviewed. I think that's it from me. So I will stop sharing my screen. The one thing I didn't talk about up front, which is kind of intentional, so I'll talk about it now, is maybe a bit about the actual flow of an application. So I'm the Director of Programs and Operations in the College of Graduate Studies and Research, but what does that actually mean when you're applying as an MSc student in biology? So you apply to a department. The department, if they want you as a student, they say, yep, this student checks off all the boxes. They recommend that admission to my office. My office reviews and says, yep, this student meets all the requirements of the institution. And then we're the ones who admit you. So we're really integral in kind of that initial processing. And that's our role on the admission side of things. Yeah, I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Marc and Cody. That was really phenomenal. One of the things that I know that comes up from a student perspective is do you have any suggestions for things like really not to do? Things that you've seen students do or try and do that you're like, don't do that. That doesn't work. I don't care if you read it on the internet, do not do that.
I'll start because this is my favorite one. And it happens quite often. So a student will let's say they want to, usually for course-based programs, they want to apply to the Masters in Public Health, for example. They will email myself and my dean and the executive director of the School of Public Health saying, I just want you to know I submitted an application. I'd really like it to be reviewed favorably. That's probably the worst thing you can do because it twigs for all of us. So then we like go through with a fine-tooth comb. And on the flip side, if you're applying to a thesis-based program, and I mean, everyone's applying to multiple programs. So we all realize that. I applied to 4 different universities when I was looking at my master's. But make sure you actually submit like that initial outreach email that Cody mentioned, make sure you send it to faculty individually. Don't send it to a faculty member here, a faculty member at the U of T, a faculty member at SFU, and a faculty member at UBC all in the same email, because that doesn't work. That just means no one's going to take you.
We have some raised hands. If you guys want to either unmute yourself, Eileen, I see that your hand is raised. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please go ahead.
Sure. So can you loop back and talk about the testing a bit more? Just because I am currently partnered with AES and I have some test accommodations. So I'm just wondering how it would work with that piece if I were doing master's testing.
Okay, do you know what type of program you're looking at? Just so I can talk about some specific tests or just kind of
Sure.
generally?
Yeah. I am looking at pursuing my master's in Indigenous Studies.
Okay, so there are no required standardized tests for those types of programs on campus. Really, in Canada, we only use them for business programs or economics. If you're going to a graduate program in the States, almost all of them require a GRE, but that's not the case in Canada. I will say, though, that standardized tests are notoriously inflexible in terms of accommodations. So it's good that you're thinking through that now. If you were going to write one of these tests, it would be really good to reach out to the testing center and see just how inflexible they can be and what they'd be willing to accommodate in that sense, because they're run entirely separate from the universities. So if you wrote a GMAT test, you'd get your score back and you can include that in your application to multiple programs because it's totally separate from the institution.
Okay.
Thanks, Eileen. Great question. Sydney put one in the chat. How much of a creative hook is actually helpful in a motivation statement, or does it just detract from your seriousness?
Okay, so again, it's really context specific. If you're applying to like an MFA and you want to do a creative writing program, might be really useful. If you're applying to an MSc in chemistry, not so much. Keep in mind that you really have to know your audience, and it's really a formal piece of writing, and that statement of interest, research statement, whatever they're calling it, statement of purpose, it's sometimes referred to, is really kind of that one document that everyone will keep going back to when they're reviewing your application and deciding whether you'd be a good fit for the program and for the department. So that's usually what most decisions are made based on. So I would just kind of flag that as it's really important. Make sure you're conveying what you want to convey and you're positioning yourself how you want to position yourself in that statement.
There's another good question. Do most programs need an honors program first before you apply to graduate school?
That's an excellent question because I actually mentioned it. So I'm glad someone was paying attention because I said honors program or equivalent. So yeah, if you did a degree at a Canadian university, what that means is we're looking for a 4-year bachelor's degree. So that we separate those from 3-year bachelor's degrees. So if you have a 3-year degree, you don't meet the admission requirements based on that. But if you have a 4-year degree, and in Canada, those can be 4-year degree, a 4-year honors degree, an honors degree. They go by a whole bunch of different names. But yeah, it's typically denoting a 4-year degree. If you've done your undergrad at a European university, it's usually only a 3-year, but that's equivalent to our 4 years. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be an honors degree, it just has to be a 4-year degree.
So does that mean they work students harder in Europe and then they can get more in the 3
Their
years?
summers are not as long as ours.
Ah, there you go. If anyone has any more questions that they'd like to put into the chat or unmute themselves, feel free. I'm actually going to stop the recording. Usually I do that after sort of the first rush of questions comes through because sometimes there are questions that people want to ask and they would prefer them not to be on the recording. And so I want to make sure that I honor that as well. Thank you to both of you, Marc and Cody, for being here with us today and presenting such great information. I'll stop the recording.
I'll just